What happened then, after this area became better settled and the Jim Crow laws became enacted in this area, was that Lake Worth was an all-white community. And even though they had to have separate but equal to pass constitutional muster at that time, the city charter calls for black residential districts and white residential districts in which the other could not live. By the way, the penalty for living in the wrong area of the wrong race at that time was a $500 fine for each 10 days of residence. And again, $1915. You can imagine what this was. But the city fathers did not designate any black residential districts. And the city limits at that time were 12th Avenue South. So there was an area between Lantana and Lake Worth that was sort of a no man's land, and that's where the black community lived. And there were quarters there that were for the workers of the farms, Bahamians and other African Americans first settled in that area. They were not part of the city of Lake Worth. Neither Lake Worth nor Lantana wanted that population. In 1926, Lantana was expanding, and they annexed the area right up to where the current city limit is, which is about halfway between Lantana Road and 6th Avenue South. And Lake Worth, not to be outdone, annexed all the land south to that line, all the way west to Military Trail, interestingly enough. And then they had that black population in the city for the first time. The Ku Klux Klan was operating very openly at that time. They even ran a school here in a two-story building someplace downtown, which they bragged about in a newspaper called the Fiery Cross, which was published in Indianapolis. It was a national Klan publication. And they were quite proud of the fact that they had this all-white school in Lake Worth. Looking back at the city records, there was a move to expand the colored district at that time, which included that land down to Barton Road further to the west. And so then several women went to the city council and said, well, now we have these blacks living in our area, you have to drive them out. This is an all-white town. The city fathers, in their wisdom, instead of doing that, did designate the first black residential district to be that area that became the historic black community between 12th Avenue South and the city limits of Lantana. That area was definitely enclosed. It was very much like a ghetto, if you will. There was a wall built along the northern part of that, running from 12th Avenue South, partway down toward Lantana. Then there was a city dump that was enclosing the rest of it down to the city limits. And I've heard story tell that people woke up one morning and there was just trash being dumped there. And people decided they didn't want that large of a black community, and they just created the dump ad hoc in order to limit the growth of that community. So this addition was in 1949, according to the city clerk's records, and so probably sometime shortly thereafter that the dump was founded. There were no through streets to Lantana. It was a commercial industrial area, and it's a solid wall there to the south, so that enclosed that ghetto area to the south. And then there was the FEC tracks that ran kind of forming a triangle that was called the Osborne Colored Addition, which was the traditional black neighborhood, which continued to exist as an all-black neighborhood until federal law overturned it with the Fair Housing Act in the 60s. So that was the area where the black community lived until they were allowed to intermix. They were in the city of Lake Worth. The police did patrol the area. If you talk to older people, they'll tell about having been stopped by the police and asked, questions, especially if they were outside of the area at night. They were very often expected to have a note from an employer or some other excuse, or to be in their area after dark. They got very few city services. Most of the roads down there were unpaved and sandy and so forth, and no street lighting and no sewer and so forth and so on. But they were part of the city. And as far as we know, there were, if there were crimes committed down there, that the city of Lake Worth police did take part. And eventually there were some African Americans on the police force that helped to ease relations with that community and so forth into the 50s and early 60s. There was down in that community a boarding house for blacks, and there was a school, the all-black school, which is currently called the Osborne School. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, still standing. It was a 3-room schoolhouse. There were stores and other facilities. The general knowledge of history always enlightens us about the human condition. Those that don't know their history are destined to repeat it. And sometimes people have attitudes that we don't understand where they're coming from. And when we know their personal history and their struggles, it helps us to understand each other. So this is really the universal question about why history is important. On a local level, we are living in a community where people are mostly from other places. Don't know much about this local history and don't really have roots in this local community. So them knowing about what happened before with the indigenous people, whether it's the Jaga or the Seminoles or the early settlers here or the early establishment of the town and all these things that happen in between, really helps people feel connected and builds community here locally.